I never imagined I'd find myself sharing this story, but recent events have forced my hand. The betrayal I've experienced runs deeper than I could have ever anticipated, and it's time to break my silence. I, Evelyn Bennett, 32, recently discovered that my parents had diverted my $120,000 MBA fund to help my sister, Madison Parker, 37, launch her luxury boutique. The revelation has left me reeling, struggling to process the depth of their deception. Let me take you through the beginning of this nightmare. My grandparents were not just wealthy, they were visionaries in Silicon Valley's early days. They embodied the true entrepreneurial spirit, valuing innovation, calculated risk-taking, and most importantly, education. Living in different states meant our interactions were limited, but every conversation we had centered around my future in the tech industry. Education is the key to disrupting any industry, my grandmother would often say. The irony of those words haunts me now. 3 years ago, we lost my grandfather after a brief illness. Grandmother remained our family's anchor, still sending thoughtful care packages and handwritten notes celebrating every milestone in my consulting career. Each note contained her wisdom and usually a check marked for your MBA fund. Little did I know she and grandfather had been methodically building something much bigger for my future in tech leadership. When their will was read, the distribution seemed fair at first glance. My parents inherited their Palo Alto property and substantial savings. Madison received the family's vintage jewelry collection, valued well into six figures. I was bequeathed a significant education fund, specifically earmarked for my MBA studies at a top-tier business school. The will explicitly stated that the funds were to be held in trust by my parents until I needed them for my education. At the time, I was grateful for my grandparents' foresight in supporting my ambitions in tech leadership. Never did I suspect my parents would manipulate these funds. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. Family history, flashback. Madison has always been our family's golden child, a truth that becomes more apparent with each passing year. It's challenging to articulate without sounding bitter, but she was clearly the favorite. In their eyes, she was exceptional, naturally gifted, hardworking, and destined for greatness. I still vividly remember my high school graduation. I had just won the National Tech Innovation Competition, secured a full ride to Stanford, and was delivering the valedictorian speech. Yet when I looked out into the audience, my parents were absorbed in their phones, barely acknowledging my presence. Later that evening, when Madison announced she was thinking about opening a boutique after her third failed startup attempt, they were ecstatic. "You have such an amazing eye for luxury," they gushed. My achievements that day, the scholarship, the awards, the speech, earned merely a perfunctory "good job." This pattern continued throughout my life. After graduating with honors from Stanford, I secured a position at a prestigious consulting firm in San Francisco. Over the past decade, I've climbed the corporate ladder, earning respect from both Silicon Valley veterans and emerging tech leaders. I now lead a team of 15 consultants, managing digital transformation projects worth hundreds of millions. Yet to my parents, I was always just the practical one who had it easy because I was naturally good with numbers. Madison's path took a different direction. After several unsuccessful ventures, she finally opened a small boutique in an up-and-coming neighborhood. Her husband, Connor, transitioned from real estate to luxury property development, though their combined income barely covered their lifestyle aspirations. For the past year, they've been fixated on opening a high-end boutique in San Francisco's most exclusive shopping district. Every family dinner became a detailed presentation about retail space costs and how they were missing out on the luxury market boom. They would lament about market rates while eyeing locations far beyond their means. Despite being in their late 30s, my parents still viewed them as young entrepreneurs needing support, nodding sympathetically and saying things like, "You deserve to be in the premier shopping district. And it's so challenging for new luxury businesses these days. MBA application process. 1 month ago. About a month ago, I began preparing my MBA applications. This wasn't an impulsive decision. It was the culmination of years of strategic career planning. I'd meticulously researched programs, built my professional portfolio, and maintained an impeccable track record in tech consulting. My goal was clear: admission to Princeton's MBA program, a crucial step toward executive leadership in Silicon Valley's top firms. Dr. Victoria Chen, my mentor at the consulting firm, had helped me craft a roadmap to C-suite positions. Every senior tech executive I admired held an MBA from an elite institution. One evening, I brought up the education fund during a family dinner at an upscale San Francisco restaurant. The application fees alone for top MBA programs amount to thousands, and I needed to know exactly what resources were available. Their reaction should have been my first real warning sign. "Don't worry about that right now," my father muttered, shifting uncomfortably in his designer chair. My mother quickly interjected, "Just focus on your applications for now. We'll discuss the details later." Before I could press further, they abruptly steered the conversation to Madison's plans for her luxury boutique opening. Initially, I tried to rationalize their evasiveness, assuming they were just disorganized with the paperwork. But something felt off. A week later, during a lunch meeting at a trendy tech district cafe, I approached the subject more directly. I explained that I needed to understand the fund's status to budget for applications to multiple elite programs. That's when they dropped the bomb. "We've allocated the MBA fund to Madison," my mother stated casually, as if commenting on the weather. "She's opening her flagship boutique in Union Square." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. My father chimed in, saying Madison needed it more right now, and that it wouldn't be fair for me to get a free elite education when Madison had struggled so much with her entrepreneurial journey. When I asked them to repeat themselves, something inside me snapped. Years of suppressed frustration erupted. The confrontation. Luxury restaurant. "How could you do this?" My voice trembled with barely contained rage. That money was explicitly designated for my MBA studies. It's not just unethical, it's illegal. I demanded to know how they could justify embezzling funds that my grandparents had specifically set aside for my education. My mother rolled her eyes dismissively, sipping her champagne as if we were discussing something as trivial as the weather. "Don't be so dramatic, Evelyn. You're already successful in tech consulting. You'll figure something out. It's not like you can't get loans like everyone else in Silicon Valley." They acted as if they'd done nothing wrong, as if my future and my grandparents' wishes were inconsequential details in their grand plan for Madison's luxury retail empire. When I mentioned taking legal action, their response was beyond belief. They actually laughed, not just a chuckle, but full-throated laughter that drew attention from nearby diners. "With what resources?" my father sneered, looking directly at me. "Even top tech lawyers are out of your league without that fund." My mother added with a patronizing smile, "Don't be ridiculous, darling. This is a family matter." The humiliation burned through me as other diners tried to pretend they weren't watching our family drama unfold. I sat there, stunned, in one of San Francisco's most exclusive restaurants, suddenly seeing my parents with complete clarity. They had always seen me as an afterthought, someone whose future could be sacrificed for Madison's latest venture. My track record in tech consulting, my career achievements, my carefully planned path to executive leadership, none of it mattered to them. Late-night reflection. Luxury condo. That night, sleep eluded me in my Marina District condo. I couldn't stop thinking about how my grandparents had trusted my parents to honor their wishes. They never knew the reality of our family dynamics. I never told them about the constant favoritism. After all, I wasn't being abused, was I? They just loved Madison more, prioritized her dreams over mine, saw her failed ventures as charming attempts while viewing my successes as mundane expectations. Next morning, Tech District Office. The next morning, I arrived early at our sleek office building in the heart of San Francisco's Tech District. I requested an immediate meeting with Dr. Victoria Chen. She isn't just any mentor. She's been my guiding light since I joined the firm, watching me grow from a junior consultant to team leader. More importantly, she's a legend in Silicon Valley with deep connections to top-tier venture capital firms and law practices. I also plan to contact Uncle Marcus Bennett. As a successful tech entrepreneur who sold his startup for billions, he's always seen through my parents' favoritism. Though not heavily involved in my childhood, he's shown genuine interest in my career trajectory and tech aspirations. He's the only family member who's achieved greater success than my parents in Silicon Valley. Something shifted inside me when my parents mocked my threat of legal action. While I've always been the quiet one, the reasonable tech consultant who never caused waves, they assumed I was powerless. They were about to discover that the daughter they consistently underestimated had built far more powerful connections than they realized. First update, 2 weeks later. The past 2 weeks have been transformative. After my meeting with Dr. Chen, things accelerated faster than I anticipated. She didn't just offer support. She connected me with her former classmate at Anderson and Reed, one of Silicon Valley's most prestigious tech law firms. This isn't just about money, she reminded me, her voice firm. It's about holding them accountable and honoring your grandparents' vision for tech leadership. The meeting with the lawyers was eye-opening. They confirmed that my parents had blatantly violated both the terms of the will and their fiduciary duties. What shocked me most was learning that my parents could face criminal charges for their actions. The lawyers uncovered something disturbing. My parents had been gradually transferring funds to Madison's business accounts months before they admitted it to me. Game changer. Uncle Marcus's intervention. Uncle Marcus's involvement changed everything. Within hours of my LinkedIn message, he called from his Palo Alto office. His response exceeded my wildest expectations. "I've watched your parents favor Madison's failed ventures for years," he said, his voice sharp with anger. "But stealing from their own daughter's future? That crosses every line in Silicon Valley's ethics. Don't worry about the legal fees. I'm handling everything." Uncle Marcus wasn't just talk. He took immediate action. He assembled a team of elite tech industry lawyers and engaged a forensic accountant specializing in startup funding to trace every penny. Within days, they compiled evidence showing my parents had been systematically draining the education fund over months, funneling it into Madison's boutique venture. First confrontation, Friday. The first clash came on Friday. My parents' lawyer called, attempting to broker a family settlement. They offered to cover a portion of my MBA expenses in exchange for dropping legal action. Uncle Marcus's response was ruthless. "You'll either face criminal charges or return the entire amount, plus Silicon Valley's standard venture capital interest rates. There will be no negotiation." My parents' reaction was priceless. The emails started flooding in. How could you involve Silicon Valley outsiders in family matters? We were going to help fund your MBA eventually. You're destroying the family's reputation in the tech community. I forwarded everything to Uncle Marcus's legal team without responding. He then revealed the second phase of his strategy. Beyond recovering the money, he's pushing for a complete audit of my parents' financial dealings, suggesting there might be other irregularities we don't yet know about. Madison's response. Next day. Madison finally broke her silence yesterday. In a lengthy email, she claimed ignorance about the source of her boutique funding. "Mom and Dad said they had secured private investors," she wrote. "I never imagined they would divert your MBA fund. She ended by urging me to be practical and find a family-focused solution. I forwarded her email to Uncle Marcus. His response was characteristically direct. Forward it to the legal team. It proves she knew about the money after the fact, but made no attempt to return it. She's complicit in the misappropriation of venture capital. The breaking point. This morning. This morning brought the most satisfying development yet. My parents' lawyer called Uncle Marcus in a panic. The forensic accountant had discovered that my parents had begun transferring funds using their power of attorney, even before my grandmother passed away. This could significantly escalate the charges in Silicon Valley's legal ecosystem. My parents are now desperately trying to make things right. Mom left a tearful voicemail, claiming they would find a way to replace the MBA fund. Dad sent an email acknowledging they may have made a mistake, but insisted they were just trying to help the family business grow. Uncle Marcus's advice was crystal clear. Don't respond. Let them panic. They mocked you when they thought you were powerless in the tech world. Now it's their turn to feel helpless. Dr. Chen's support throughout this has been invaluable. Beyond providing a stellar recommendation letter, she's already approved my leave of absence for when I start my MBA program. You're showing the kind of strategic thinking we need in tech leadership, she told me today. Not many could handle this situation with such professional precision. Legal proceedings, 1 week later. Unless my parents return the entire fund plus standard tech industry interest rates, the legal team is preparing to file formal charges next week. Uncle Marcus predicts they'll have to liquidate some assets to cover everything, but as he says, that's their problem, not yours. This is how Silicon Valley handles betrayal. I've temporarily relocated to a secure luxury apartment complex in South Beach. Building security has been briefed, and my parents are on a strict no-entry list. Uncle Marcus has also engaged a cybersecurity firm to monitor any attempts at digital contact. The evidence of harassment could be crucial if we need a restraining order. Second update. 3 weeks later. The situation has escalated dramatically over the past 3 weeks. I can finally share the details of how our legal strategy unfolded. The forensic investigation revealed far more than we anticipated. The first bombshell dropped during our initial court filing. Uncle Marcus's team discovered that beyond misappropriating my MBA fund, my parents had been abusing their power of attorney over my grandmother's accounts during her final months. The evidence showed they had been systematically moving funds to support Madison's boutique venture long before grandmother's passing. Their lawyer's face during the initial hearing was unforgettable. He clearly had no idea about the extent of their financial misconduct. He actually requested a recess to confront my parents about withholding information, and I later learned he's considering withdrawing from the case. The most shocking revelation came from my grandmother's former caregiver in Palo Alto. After seeing our legal notice in the estate documents, she contacted Uncle Marcus. It turns out my grandmother had repeatedly discussed the MBA fund with my parents in her final months, explicitly stating it was for my tech industry education. The caregiver had documented every conversation in her care log, a standard practice in Silicon Valley's elder care industry. The unraveling. Madison's situation. Madison's involvement has taken an interesting turn. After realizing the legal implications of accepting misappropriated funds, she hired her own attorney, creating a significant rift with our parents who expected her to maintain family solidarity. They were furious when her lawyer advised her to distance herself from the situation. The boutique situation has become particularly messy. The court is now investigating the purchase since the down payment came from stolen funds. The matter has been reported to Madison's investors, who are reviewing their funding agreements. If our parents falsified any documents they co-signed for the business loans, it could trigger a fraud investigation. Deposition day. The deposition was particularly satisfying. My father tried to maintain his arrogant demeanor until Uncle Marcus's attorney presented evidence of their calculated scheme. It was painful watching him try to explain their actions. My mother actually broke down when she admitted they never intended to repay the money they'd taken. Their damage control attempts have been almost comical. They're now trying to claim they were confused about the will's terms, despite numerous recorded conversations with my grandmother and her attorneys. This is their third lawyer. Two have already quit, and they're desperately seeking a settlement. Our legal team laid out the final terms with no room for negotiation. They would have to repay every cent taken, with interest dating back to their first unauthorized transfer. They would also be responsible for all our legal fees, including the forensic investigation, which had become quite expensive. We demanded they stop their gaslighting and attempt to rewrite history, requiring a formal written admission of their misconduct. Finally, they would need to sign a legally binding agreement to cease all communication. No more using family members as messengers, manipulative emails, or surprise visits. The social fallout. My parents' standing in Silicon Valley's elite circles is crumbling. Several of their tech industry connections have quietly reached out to express their shock, and word has spread through their social network. My father's membership at the prestigious San Francisco Tech Leaders Club is under review, and my mother was asked to step down from her position on several startup advisory boards. Their peers are distancing themselves. Nobody wants to associate with someone who would steal their child's future in the tech industry. Madison's situation is deteriorating as well. The board of investors for her boutique has called an emergency meeting, concerned about having their brand associated with financial misconduct. The luxury retail community in San Francisco is surprisingly small, and news travels fast. The final development is particularly satisfying. Remember how my parents laughed when I mentioned legal action? After Uncle Marcus's team filed a motion to freeze their assets to prevent further financial misconduct, their lawyer contacted us within hours, begging for a settlement conference. Uncle Marcus remains ruthless in his approach. When my parents tried to appeal to his family loyalty, he sent a scathing email, copied to our entire extended family. Family loyalty? You lost any right to discuss loyalty when you stole from your daughter and laughed in her face. Welcome to Silicon Valley's consequences. My complete silence has my parents increasingly desperate. They've resorted to sending mutual connections to reach out on their behalf, but each attempt only strengthens our harassment case. Their desperation becomes more apparent with each passing day. Final update. 4 months later. 4 months have passed since my last update, and I can finally share the conclusion to this story. The outcome of the final legal proceedings has been more devastating for my parents than any of us anticipated. Let me explain how justice was ultimately served in true Silicon Valley style. The final hearing. Let me start with my favorite moment. The final hearing where my parents finally realized they had no options left. Their carefully constructed facade finally crumbled in the courtroom. The judge was particularly severe in her closing remarks, describing their actions as a calculated betrayal of both their daughters and their own parents' final wishes. She specifically highlighted how their laughter at my initial legal threat demonstrated an alarming level of moral bankruptcy. The forensic analysis ultimately revealed that my parents had been planning this misappropriation for over a year before my grandmother's passing. They had methodically fabricated false family agreements and documented fictional conversations about me voluntarily giving up the MBA fund. The court found their premeditation made their actions significantly more egregious. The penalties were substantial. Beyond returning my MBA fund with interest, they were ordered to pay punitive damages that nearly doubled the initial amount. The judge justified the harsh penalty by pointing to their deliberate malice and repeated attempts to mislead the court. The ironic part? My parents had to sell their Palo Alto property. Yes, the very home they inherited from my grandparents, to cover these penalties. They've downsized significantly, moving from their prestigious address to a modest apartment on the outskirts of the tech corridor. Their social descent has been dramatic. Tech club memberships revoked, positions on startup advisory boards lost. The social network my mother spent decades building has disintegrated. It turns out Silicon Valley's elite social circles have zero tolerance for those who steal from their children's future and lie about it. Professional consequences. The professional fallout has been equally severe. My father, who prided himself on his Silicon Valley connections, was forced into early retirement. No one in the tech industry wants to do business with someone who's been legally proven to have stolen from their own child's inheritance. His former colleagues now avoid him in local coffee shops. My mother had to resign from her volunteer positions, leading local tech industry philanthropy organizations. The final blow came when they were asked to step down from all leadership roles at the Innovation Church, where they'd been active members for 20 years. They've become pariahs in the very community they helped build. Perhaps the most noteworthy development, according to Uncle Marcus, is Madison and Connor's situation. They went into panic mode when their investors learned that the boutique's funding came from stolen money. Their business loans were immediately called into review. They're now facing their own legal challenges due to their knowing acceptance of misappropriated funds. Madison's career has imploded completely. The luxury retail community cited ethical concerns and loss of community trust in their formal statement distancing themselves from her brand. Since the news has spread through San Francisco's fashion circles, she's struggling to maintain any business relationships. Connor's situation wasn't much better. His real estate development firm placed him on administrative leave while investigating his involvement in the financial misconduct. Though he wasn't directly responsible for the theft, his signature on loan documents containing false information raised serious ethical questions. The strain proved too much for their relationship. Connor moved out of their Marina District apartment last week. He accused her of being just like her parents, while Madison blamed him for not being more supportive during the crisis. They're now in the process of ending their engagement. The family meeting and aftermath. Uncle Marcus's strategy of complete social and legal destruction proved more effective than anyone anticipated. When my parents made one final plea for family loyalty, he organized a family meeting, not for reconciliation, but to present their deception to the entire extended family. During this meeting, he laid out a timeline of their deceit, detailing the fabricated documents and the lies they'd told various family members. Disgusted was the universal response. Several relatives who had initially tried to mediate the conflict now publicly condemned my parents. The meeting effectively ended any remaining family support they might have had. The most telling moment came when my mother's sister, who had always been one of their strongest supporters, stood up and declared, "I don't even recognize who you've become in this tech world anymore." Personal victory and future. As for me, I've emerged stronger than ever. My MBA fund has been fully restored, along with substantial damages. Beyond getting my money back, I've been accepted into Princeton's prestigious MBA program with a merit scholarship. Dr. Chen's recommendation letter praised my exceptional strategic thinking and integrity in handling this crisis. My consulting firm has been incredibly supportive, granting me a leave of absence for the MBA program and promising me an executive position upon graduation. Your handling of this situation demonstrated the leadership qualities we need at the senior level, Dr. Chen told me. Uncle Marcus, now a true mentor, is already discussing potential venture capital opportunities with me post-MBA and has introduced me to his extensive network in Silicon Valley. Your grandparents would be proud, he said. You've shown you have the backbone for tech leadership. I've moved to an exclusive penthouse in a secure building that keeps my parents at bay. Security has their photos and strict instructions. Their calls and emails are blocked, with all communication attempts routed directly to our legal team. Final twist. The final twist of the knife. The tech startup hub where Madison's failed boutique was supposed to be is visible from my parents' new apartment. They must look at the symbol of their downfall every day. As Uncle Marcus says, Silicon Valley karma can be poetic. Yesterday, I received an anonymous note from someone in their former social circle. Apparently, my mother rarely leaves their apartment now, only venturing out for essentials. My father reportedly spends hours alone at local coffee shops, staring at his laptop, perhaps reflecting on the empire they lost. Their once busy social calendar in the tech community is now completely empty. As I prepare for my MBA program, I often think about my grandmother's words. Education is the key to disrupting any industry. She was right. Thanks to her foresight and Uncle Marcus's support, I've not only secured my education fund, but also taught my parents a valuable lesson in Silicon Valley ethics. That's the end of this story. Thank you for your support throughout this journey. While I never wanted things to end this way, I'm at peace knowing that justice has been served, Silicon Valley style.